So, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has been out in the world for almost 3 weeks. I am still playing through my initial playthrough. I am loving the game at every single turn. It consistently is blowing me away. And honestly, it still surprises me to know and to see that so many people out there have already completed the game. A game this massive feels like it should take months upon months to complete, but that is what it is. I know a lot of you guys have already finished the game, and I've seen almost completely overwhelmingly positive reception to it. Yes, there are some criticisms, but for the most part, this game has delivered. It's definitely delivering for me in my initial kind of run through the game. However, the newness of the game has not stopped a lot of us from looking forward and thinking ahead in terms of the Zelda franchise, and it has also not even stopped Nintendo from discussing the future of Zelda as well. As many of us know, and as I've also discussed on a couple of videos in the recent weeks as well, Eiji Aonuma himself has discussed Zelda and the future of the franchise and very much laid out that he and Nintendo viewed Breath of the Wild as kind of the beginning of a new template or a new foundation for future Zelda games. And of course, Tears of the Kingdom really shows us that, because that game is the same kind of game. It is an evolution of the exact same world and gameplay that Breath of the Wild introduced. Now, it is unique because it is, of course, a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, which is one of those few instances that it's happened within the Zelda franchise. But typically, a Zelda game resets every time. I've discussed this on a lot of recent videos. And we saw that in the 3D era, where the Ocarina of Time really did introduce kind of that, first version of a 3D Zelda template. And all of the subsequent games until Breath of the Wild followed that template while still changing up the world and the graphics and the art design and the story and the layout of Hyrule and all of these different things. And so when Eiji Aonuma comes out and says Breath of the Wild began kind of a new template, we now know that in theory, future Zelda games for maybe the next several decades are going to be borrowing from the foundation that Breath of the Wild created. Now, one of my favorite things to discuss in recent videos, as many of you might also know, is how I view Tears of the Kingdom as a game that is really delivering on the vision and the promise that first began with Zelda Skyward Sword back on the Wii in 2011, which is a game I've always loved and defended. I enjoyed it a lot when it first released in 2011. I was always taken in by the concept of these floating islands and this floating world in the sky where you can fly around to different islands and find secrets and NPCs and characters and mini-games and puzzles and all of these floating islands. I thought it was the coolest thing. And then, of course, you can jump off of those islands and jump out of the sky and land in Hyrule below and then traverse Hyrule. That was a very cool concept, and even though it was limited by the technology of its day, I think Skyward Sword was fantastic. And so I think Tears of the Kingdom said, let's actually do this the real way we want to, with a huge open seamless world, with tons of floating islands, with a lot more to do, and you can just jump right down to Hyrule with no loading screen in between. And I think it's wonderful for what it's doing. I absolutely love it. It is my favorite part of the game. But that also got me thinking about another Zelda game that had a very unique approach to its world and its gameplay, and if maybe in the future Nintendo would revisit that concept the same way they did with Skyward Sword, and maybe make a modern take on that. And of course, that Zelda game would be The Wind Waker. Now, full disclosure, for those of you who may not know, but The Wind Waker is my personal favorite Zelda game of all time. And I am somebody who's been playing Zelda since the original game released on the NES, so I've experienced every single mainline game. I've experienced every era in the franchise, every change to the formula. I've been there since the beginning. And with my experience and the entire breadth of the Zelda franchise behind me, I really do believe that The Wind Waker is my favorite game. I just absolutely adore it. It was my favorite time experiencing a Zelda game, and I just adore it to death. And The Wind Waker, of course, had a very unique approach to its world and its gameplay, which was the Great Sea. Here is a huge, vast ocean, and you are Link, and you've got a little boat. Obviously, there's story context here, but to just give the elevator pitch version, you are Link, you've got a little boat, you've got a huge sea, and 50 islands, big and small, to explore and to find and to traverse and to solve puzzles and go through dungeons and meet characters and go to towns and just do all of these cool things. It was, in my opinion, it was very ahead of its time when it released in 2003 on the Nintendo GameCube. And I've always kind of compartmentalized both the Wind Waker and Skyward Sword as similar games in the Zelda franchise, with a similar approach. Here's a unique environment, either the ocean or the sky. Here's a bunch of smaller islands and things to discover, either islands in the sea or islands in the sky, and just go to them and see what you find out there. I always thought that was super cool and really made those games some of my favorite games. And so when I see Tears of the Kingdom revitalizing and completing the vision of Skyward Sword, I wonder if maybe, and I'll be curious to hear if you guys have any interest in this or not. I could almost envision a lot of people groaning when they consider this idea, but this is something I would like to see. What if Nintendo next decides to revisit the idea of a huge, vast ocean with islands to discover on a body of water, and what if they do that for a future Zelda game, and they take the core concept the Wind Waker introduced in 2003, and they modernize it for modern technology in a modern Zelda game with a whole fresh new art style and story, and they make it, I guess I would use the word better, even though Wind Waker to me is still a perfect game. You know, they would modernize it. They would make it better in the sense that it would feel more appropriate for the current day and age. What if they do that? They did it with Skyward Sword's idea with the concept of floating islands. What if they took islands on the sea and a vast ocean and did that in the modern age? I think if executed properly, which is the key word here, it could be just incredible. Now, of course, the question becomes, how could they do this and how could they make it justified and make it worth it and maybe not seem silly and also make it actually modern? Well, to me, I think one of the main things they would have to achieve, and I think that they could do this in the modern era of making a new Zelda game this way, would be to make it a little bit more simple and easy and less cumbersome to be in a boat traveling across the huge, vast ocean. Look, I love what Wind Waker was in its day, and like I've already said several times in this video, it is still to this day my favorite Zelda game. But when you go back and play that game, it's like, yeah, it's a little awkward to be stuck in this boat and sailing for so long and moving the wind around, you know, to kind of have to do things. The HD port to the Wii U did solve a lot of this by allowing you to find at the auction house a fast sail, which kind of eliminated a lot of the cumbersome aspects. So that was a great improvement on an otherwise perfect game to me. But if you do it in the more modern age, I think you need to maybe remove the concept of like the wind and needing to control and move the wind around. It was awesome in the Wind Waker, but nowadays, if they could just make it simple, like you point your boat in the direction you want to go and you just go there, that would really, really help. Also, a little bit easier to maybe warp and travel around. You know, fast travel is a very needed thing in modern open world games. And if you're going to restrict people to being in a boat and being on the water, where you traditionally move kind of slow, I think that making it advantageous with fast travel would be a huge change. But outside of that, I say they take the core concept that, again, they introduced with Tears of the Kingdom and just make it work on the ocean. I mean, if anything, not to be superficial here, but let's just take a minute and think about this. Imagine how beautiful a game, a modern Zelda game, especially if it released, you know, in the next couple of years, it would be like on the Switch too, okay? So it's going to be way more capable tech than the current Switch. Imagine how beautiful a huge, vast ocean and that water with a unique art style. I do want them to refresh the art style in the next Zelda game. I love the art style in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Absolutely, I love it. But I think 2 games is all we need, so I would like a refreshed art style. And if you still kind of go in that cel-shaded cartoony look, or if you go for something more realistic, you know, like almost like a Horizon kind of thing, or even something, I don't want to say Metroid because Metroid is sci-fi, but you guys know what I mean. Something a little bit more grounded in reality and not cartoonish. Whatever new art style they would introduce, imagine a huge ocean and tons of islands to explore, and imagine how much more intricate they can make the islands and the dungeons and the towns and the NPCs you come across in a new Zelda game on the Switch 2, like in 2026 or 2027, whenever that game would come out. It would be incredible. Wind Waker really relied on simplicity, and again, in 2003 on the GameCube, it worked fantastically well for that. In fact, it didn't feel simple at the time. By today's standards, it's simple. So if you picture coming across small islands, big islands, medium islands in this huge, vast ocean, and if they make it fun to be in the ocean, so it has to be fun to sail around, if they do that, it would just be incredible to come across temples and secrets and puzzles to solve and random people stuck on an island and side quests while traversing this huge, big, grand ocean. And they can even make it a lot more dense in terms of ground to actually walk across compared to what they did with the Wind Waker. You have to imagine the 2003 template of the Wind Waker, but all of the different quality of life changes and modernization they would do to that concept to make it work today. And again, if they execute it properly, it could be phenomenal. Could it be bad? Could they screw it up and make it not work? Yes, that's always a possibility. But I think that the Zelda team has shown that they don't let us down very often, so I think they would deliver and execute, and it just becomes the most exciting prospect to me personally. Now, do I think they would do this? Probably not. It's kind of like a wishful thinking sort of concept just because I'm a super big fanboy of the Wind Waker specifically. I do think it's possible. I mean, I don't see why Nintendo wouldn't be willing to do it, but something tells me that that's just not in their game plan. I would love to see them try. I think it's a possibility, but I put it at like a 15% possibility. More than likely, I think the next Zelda game is either going to be a third game in this Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom kind of world and art style and continuing that story. And yes, I know Skyward Sword's story is kind of connected to these games, but I'm not talking about including Skyward Sword in like a trilogy of these games. I'm thinking more same art style, same world of Hyrule, same general concept, and continuing the conflict that first started in Breath of the Wild. I think they would either do a third game continuing this current era of Zelda games, or they would just refresh it to something else new, but not make it a revisiting of the Wind Waker concept. So that's what I predict, but man, I would love to be wrong. I would love to see them revisit this Wind Waker Great Sea concept. Like I said, I think there's that small chance, so that's what I would hope to see because I think they could make a phenomenal game. Would you guys like to see Nintendo do this the same way Tears of the Kingdom modernized Skyward Sword's concept? Would you like to see a new Zelda game modernize Wind Waker's concept? You know I want to see it, but I do want to hear what you guys think.